you're given, that's how we live it. Don't be mad at the system, it's simply how we've existed. I hear a lot of people talking like they politicians and choose to be an accountant because it's safe in a business. Not because they want to do it, just because they heard it pays. And who the fuck wants to be poor knowing that's how we've been raised? Society is getting heavy, I can feel the weight. The pressure of success is like 100 million pounds of shit.
1, 2, 3. How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Today's going to be a quick episode. We're trying not to do things on the weekend, but Russ had this great idea, and I wanted to get the information out there. Today, we're going to be talking about just giving some tips, if you will, on how to make sure that the charges that you write on the inmates, the disciplinaries, they stick. This is a very important topic because sometimes we get frustrated because the charges don't stick. But the thing is, it may not necessarily be the hearing officer or admin. It may be just how we're writing those charges. Russ, what's up, Russ? How's Keepers of Chaos going?
Keepers of Chaos is doing great. We're getting more and more members. Have a lot of people there that are really engaging and wanting to, really put their knowledge, their experience at our fingertips. And so, every day it's just a blessing to, have been the one that started and founded that particular page.
Yeah, I love it, Russ. Again, the mentoring part of it all. It's something I promote all the time, guys. If you're watching this video and, you're thinking about entering the profession, or maybe you're in the profession, but you have some questions, Keepers of Chaos has a mentoring program. It's free. Just join the group on Facebook, and a lot of people there do want to share their experience. Just a great community. Also, guys, we have the book on the market, Inmate Manipulation Decoded. It is doing very well. A little shocked about how well it's doing, so I'm very happy. A lot of agencies are starting to pick it up and give it to their people. Again, the book was written to hopefully provide a safer environment for us working in corrections. That was the key. I'm working on my second book now, Correctional Leadership. And then Russ will have his book out soon, hopefully, on complacency. I'm putting it out there, Russ. So once I say it, you have to do it. And, it's my goal to be able to hold Russ's book in my hand. That should complete the circle. That means most of the people on Tier Talk have a book out. Now, guys, if you haven't, the show Tier Talks for you, brave men and women that work in corrections, so please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell is going to notify you every time I post a video. We're going to go to our sponsor. We come back. We're going to talk about writing up disciplinary charges. Very interesting topic. Stand by.
I wanted to attend a university that had an intelligence program. I wanted to look at problems different. I wanted to increase my critical thinking abilities. AMU offered those avenues to expand. Obtaining your degree as an adult, you're actually paying yourself and investing in yourself. You can't put a dollar on it, it's priceless. It's something that can never be taken away from you.
American Military University. Learn from the leader.
All right, Russ, I know that this topic is important to you. I mean, text me. Right now, guys, in New Jersey, it's 11:15. For Russ, it's at 8:15. And, it's a Saturday, but Russ, he wants to discuss this topic. So, Russ, why is this so important to you about when it comes to writing disciplinary charges?
Well, this is one of the things that I see in the forums. And for those of you that know me and have seen me out there, I spend a lot of time in different forums, not just my own, over on Anthony's, over on the Correctional Officer Brotherhood, HACO, and a bunch of others, the Thin Silver Line. And this is one of the topics that, kind of comes up all the time. And I'll hear officers, that are, kind of down in the mouth about, they submit a disciplinary report on an inmate, and the next thing they know, it's getting dismissed. And they're obviously, upset about the charges being dismissed, but they're also usually upset with that hearing lieutenant, because oftentimes it's a lieutenant that hears these things. And sometimes their outrage is justified. Sometimes maybe not so much. This is one of those things that we have to look at, and we have to understand what are the things that cause that disciplinary process to go bad. I spent years and years and years as a disciplinary officer. And so, I was right up there doing all of that paperwork. I mean, everything from Mirandizing inmates to collecting the evidence, to making copies of the evidence, to submitting it out there, sometimes even to their attorneys and so forth. So I think I have a lot of knowledge that I can share, and it doesn't have to be real deep. It just has to, you just have to understand a few of the little quirks about the system that we work in and what you need to bring those nails. And I know that Anthony has probably heard me say this before. If you're going to hold a crucifixion, you got to bring the nails. And that's what this whole disciplinary process is about.
Right now, guys, some agencies may do it within. Some agencies may have a panel. Some agencies may get a disciplinary hearing officer assigned by the higher executive staff. But either way, guys, anytime you write something, you have to be prepared that you're not the only person that's going to be seeing it. So first, let's do this. When you're writing a charge, the charge is one thing, but the report that connects to the charge is what matters. You're not using the professional jargon that only we know. You're writing a report that is meant for other people to understand it, because at any point, these charges can get appealed. And once the inmate exhausts the in-house appeals, it can go up to an appellate division, because some of these charges carry sanctions that could lead to an inmate losing their commutation time, stuff that's on their record that they don't want on their record. So with that said, first piece of advice is you're writing for a bigger audience than just what's right above you. Like, this is not a report that, even though you're submitting it to your direct supervisor, it's not a report written for your direct supervisor. So Russ, I mean, right off the bat, I don't think people realize that when they first write that report, I don't think they realize how many hands that report can possibly go to.
Exactly. And, the person that you should be writing it to, actually, just in case, because especially if it's a felony, has to be to the jury, right? Because the jury are going to be the people that have the least understanding about what it is that we do. They're going to be the ones that have the least understanding about, what kind of crimes that we see in prison. They're going to have the least understanding of how inmates manipulate things and about how gangs run things. So we want to, stay away from that jargon. If we do use jargon, we want to explain it. And then the biggest thing to do is just to put things in a linear fashion, from that first person perspective, all the way through to using that active voice when we're talking about it. It's almost as if we're, narrating, for a movie. Just think of, kind of Morgan Freeman style, explaining how everything goes along the way.
Right. And again, I love that, Russ, because this is something you need to take your time with. I know incidences happen, and then you get the supervisors that's pushing for these reports right away, especially during the heat of the moment. Emotions are still running high, and that's when we're bound to make those mistakes. That's when you have to tell the supervisor, hold on, I'm not ready to write this yet. Because guys, writing charges should never be seen as something routine. Even though we may do it a lot, it should never be seen as something routine, because each situation can always be elevated up, and make it more unique than you ever thought it would be. So with that said, you need to take your time. You need to really, focus on what needs to be said, both on the charge and the operations report. Now, the charge is just simple. The charge is just pretty much, what the infraction is. So I don't know how you guys do it. Maybe it's a number or whatever it is, and exactly where the violation is on the charge. But when you write the operations report, that's the details. That's the beginning, the middle, and the end, and it has to flow. It has to flow. I mean, whatever that charge is, you have to detail it as specifically as possible, so it's harder for people to throw it out. So it's harder for people to contest. And I know a lot of times people say, well, I can't believe they keep on throwing out my charges. Well, if your charges keep on getting thrown out, then maybe what you need to do is you need to follow up on why, and don't make the assumption that it's the disciplinary hearing officer's fault. So when I tell you to chase after a charge, it's not because you're making it personal. It's not because I want to make sure that, this inmate's charge, it goes someplace. No, it's to kind of see if you're doing it the right way. So if you have a charge that doesn't stick, the first thing you want to do is ask the disciplinary hearing officer, if allowed, what happened? What could I have done better? Would you agree with that, Russ?
Yeah, absolutely. We always want to follow up on things. And part of that follow-up, of course, is so that we can make things better for ourselves and make ourselves into better professionals and be able to see what the landscape out there looks like according to those who are over us. Because a lot of times, they have a much bigger picture view. And if we're able to look through their eyes, a lot of times we can plug those holes in those disciplinary things and understand what it is that we need to do to come up with that airtight, absolute, nail them every time kind of report. And that's what we're looking to do. And so if someone can take the report that you've written, see it through your eyes, understand everything that's happened through that perspective, then you've written a good report. If you've turned in a report, though, where people have questions and they don't understand really what happened and you didn't explain things enough, well, then, shame on you, because you're the one that has to provide that. It's incumbent upon you to be the one that provides the evidence that's used. And at least almost all the evidence that's going to be used is going to be that report. Now, may be some extemporaneous things. There might be pictures. There might be lab reports. There might be other things that go into it. But remember, you're the one there on the ground. You're the one in charge. You're the one who's coalescing all of those things together. So, make it your responsibility to provide that type of view for that audience that you're writing to, so that there's no way that they can come back with anything but a guilty charge.
I love that. And I want you to know something, guys. If you don't invest the time in drawing out these specifics and getting the evidence that's needed, don't expect the DHO or whoever's overhearing that case to do that for you. That's not their job. You are to go 100% at it. That means that if there are witnesses, put the witnesses down. Don't expect them to figure out who that is. And also, I guess we can cover first on the specifics. The administrative stuff, the time matters. The date matters. I mean, first, let's do the simple stuff here, guys. The name, how we identify the inmate, all types of ways that you definitely identify that inmate. There could be a lot of inmates that have the last name Johnson. Well, let's look at the inmate's number. If the number and the name don't match, then you got the wrong inmate. A DHO is going to be like, hey, I don't care what this inmate did. Unfortunately, this is not the right inmate, or this is not the right number that goes with that inmate. And as you're writing your report, if your times are sloppy, if there's just, the incident happened here at, let's say, 1 o'clock, and, at the initial part of the report, and then later on in the body, the time is like an hour or two later, because guys, believe it or not, stuff like that happens. It's gonna get thrown out, because again, the story's not consistent. So the first thing I want to talk about, Russ, and help me out there, is the specifics, the administrative stuff, like the name, the date, the time. I mean, how many times do you see people, write the wrong date, write the wrong name, have the wrong number, have the wrong time?
Yeah, all of that, of course, is very important, especially if it ever goes to court. Are there things that we can do to fix that if we've screwed up? There are, but sometimes, these DAs, they're looking for any little excuse to hit you over the head with something, and you don't want to give them that opportunity. And, Anthony brought up a great point just about identifying these guys. Every time I identify an inmate in the report, I put as many ways as I identified them as possible, Usually that involves their identification card. So I'll say this inmate was identified by his identification card. If I did a crime scene schematic and drew him into that crime scene schematic, I'll also mention that he was at that particular point on the crime scene, as was his card, which identified him by. Also, if I've had prior contact and interaction with this inmate, I will also say that. I will say, I also have prior contact and interactions with this inmate, so I recognized him based on those things. So the more we put in there, the better it is. And that's why I want to introduce people to a word. You'll usually only hear this in court, but that word is probative. And the word probative literally means something that tends to prove something, right? So if we have established this inmate being at that place and time through 2 or 3 different methods, through witnesses, yourself, right? Through being identified by that identification card, that's another way. All these things tend to give probative value to establishing what? Not necessarily that the inmate was guilty, but definitely that he was there, that he was part of what went on. Other things that go on that we might be able to identify him as, if you reviewed video of the particular incident, you can say, I also identified him, via that videotape, and I was able to identify him because what did I do? Well, yeah, I identified him by his identification card, and I also know him by prior contact. Let all those things build up. You're not trying to take this report and give the least amount of information possible. You're trying to take this report and give the most amount of information possible, but not just information, probative information. Probative, really, that just means it tends to bolster, it tends to prove that something was true.
Yeah, because it's sad when sometimes you have inmates, let's say we have 2 Russ Hamiltons. So I go for the first number that's there, and next thing you know, it's the wrong Russ Hamilton. Now, not only does the one inmate never get charged, but now I got the wrong person, which is technically, and let's be honest, is unfair. I also want to tell you guys your sentence structure, your spelling, how you explain the thoughts. I mean, you're put in a trusted position where the public trusts you. So they believe that you have the intelligence to do the job. If you don't put the effort into those reports to make sure that you're constructing good sentences, that it's concise, it's to the point, the spellings are correct, you're doing your due diligence when it comes to just putting that report together, and let's just say you just allow it to have the grammar mistakes and it doesn't flow correct, it's not concise, and no one knows where you're going with your thoughts, well, they're going to see that report as a reflection of you. Think about how powerful that is. I mean, a lot of times we get stuck in the routine of things, not knowing where things could head up, right? And we just, another day, another charge, and we just are quick to write it without any care and just send it out and forward it on its way so we could just be done with it. We're not looking to be, to do it in a quality fashion. We're looking just to rush it out because I want to go home, or, I got other things I want to do, or whatever the case may be. So whatever it is, your focus is not on that report. It's on what you want to do next. Let's just put it that way. So now what happens is eventually that could be the one incident where it gets challenged, and then it winds up going to a jury. And now this badly written report is going to be read in front of everyone. And trust and believe they're going to attack the credibility of that report, because they're going to be looking at, like, well, who wrote this? They're going to be attacking the credibility. But the moment they look at you and they're like, hey, did you turn this in? And then when you look at that report that you don't remember writing, because most likely this is probably 2 or 3 years down the line, it's true. You're not going to remember writing this report. And it's going to be embarrassing, because the only way you're going to remember that you wrote it is because your signature is still the same. But Russ, I mean, those reports are a reflection of us, correct?
Well, yeah, they're not just a reflection of us. They can be a reflection of our department. And, we don't ever want to be seen in that bad light. You get seen in a bad light in front of that jury, and most of these are not going to go to that. But the ones that do, if you're seen in that bad light, then you've lost the case, because they get right there. And what does it come down to? It comes down to reasonable doubt. And we don't want to establish reasonable doubt. We want to establish, an absolute certainty for the jury. So we want to take all of these things. We want to treat them very seriously. We want to do the best to, write the best report we can. So it's super easy. Some departments who are not, very well versed in knowing what's really needed out there, they may tell you different ways to write it. I'll tell you that the first thing you should do is write it in the first person. It's a mistake to write things in the third person out there, because when a jury does see it, they get confused about who's writing it, because it always looks like, this disinterested person is seeing it, and they don't know whose point of view is next. The next thing that you want to do, of course, is you want to write it in a linear fashion from beginning to end, and you want to tell it in an active voice, once again, from beginning to end. You don't want to sound like Yoda up there. Found someone you have, I would say. That's a passive voice, and we want to stay away from that unless you're really, really good at it. I would just suggest, sticking with the basics.
Right. And also, guys, just kind of going back to just the development of it all. So you are creating a story, beginning to end. And again, I like what Russ says. Like at the very beginning of my reports, I let people know where we're at. on the above date and time, this writer was, or this writer is, however, whatever you feel. But I love that first person because it's 100% correct. Because I've seen people read it and they're like, dude, who's writing this now? So right off the bat, and stay with that. Like, you can't go on the above date and time, this writer, and then later on and say, and then Officer Gangi. No. You have already identified yourself as the writer. Therefore, it's okay for you to use the word I. Now, also, you can also ask for help. You can ask for other people to kind of review it, as long as they don't change the integrity of what you have to write. This is where it gets a little controversial, but I got to tell you the right things to do. So, and I want you to take it with you, because I can't tell you to do things that can influence you writing reports. So technically, when an incident happens, what the supervisor should be doing is people should get separated and write their reports independently without the influence of each other involved. That's how it should be done. I know, unfortunately, what happens here, because this has been challenged in court, guys, is that the supervisor may decide to bring everybody together, and they decide to say, hey, listen, here's what we're going to write, or, what should we write? And everybody comes with a collective story. The first thing that they look at, especially the investigative division, is if the stories are exactly the same, they don't believe in what's being put on the paper. They believe there's going to be, believe it or not, some levels of differences, because people review things differently. Subjectively, we have our own biases. But when each report is identical to each other and it gets submitted, the internal affairs divisions, the juries at the higher level, it's a red light for them. So again, you can go to people and ask them for their advice, but they cannot change the integrity of what you're writing. So that means, hey, does this flow? Does this sound good? Yes. As opposed to, hey, should I change this? No. But Russ, what's your thoughts on what I'm saying? Because I know it's controversial. A lot of people think the opposite.
Yeah, there's a couple of things there. They really complicated the whole process of writing in California Department of Corrections when they started making sure that you reported every little, use of force that you saw. So what we had to do sometimes we had to, go to other people that were involved in, because I saw that person using force on an inmate, and I was like, which inmate was that you used force on? And get some information from them, because what tended to happen is we would have huge incidents, and they wanted to discipline officers that had seen something but not reported it. Well, you're out there in a field of 200 inmates and 60 officers. It can get very, very complicated. So there's some wiggle room there, but we want people to tell it in their own words, and we want people to make sure that they do their best to, identify the different people that are involved, whether they're inmates, whether they're free staff, whether they're officers. So we really had it taken away from us. We have to report any and all use of force that we see. So that, like I said, that did complicate it.
Yeah, like obviously in an effort to discover the specifics, that could be part of it, where, hey, I know we're involved in this code. When I was holding on to this inmate, I noticed that an officer did assist me. Do you know which officer that was? Because you are dealing with something in the heat of the moment. And, obviously it gets blurred. That's why I always think that people should take that time before they write that report. Let the emotions pass, and then really take a second to think of what really happened. And one other thing, guys, don't be afraid to say that you used force if you use force. Yes, you're gonna have to explain why, and if you hit somebody, where you hit them, exactly where you hit them. Because most of the time when people get in trouble for use of force, it may not be so much about them using the force. It's about the fact that they didn't report it. And then it was discovered on a video. And then when they, show you the video, it may be too late to change that report. Again, anything when it comes to that charge or that report, because these are all things that could lead to the charge. So we're focusing on the report, because the report is what's going to help solidify the charge. So if there's any discrepancy in the report, the charge doesn't exist. And actually, it could open up the door for a whole other concerns, especially when it starts to get ripped apart or really, really looked at. So Russ, I know a lot of people, because the way the departments are right now, they get real hesitant to use force or to note that they're using force because they're afraid that the department's going to review it and automatically, slam on them for that. But the thing is, what they've been really getting people on is that they're not reporting it. And then when the video shows it, they wind up going back saying, oh, that's right, I hit the guy in the leg, and it's not a good feel. Correct, Russ?
Yeah, and that's one thing that we just have to become more comfortable with. If you're a comfortable rider, I consider myself to be a comfortable rider, right? I've used force so many times and justified what I did that I never had any problem with it. I never gave it a second thought. I had very few problems with it ever through my career. The times that it did crop up, well, look right there in my report. It's exactly what I did. And so I knew that I was going to be in a position to, acquit myself of any potential problems. So you got to focus on these writing things. When you go in there, decide on your framework, get your times, your dates, your names and everything down, and then go through and make sure that everything has who, when, and where. And then if it involves you, you're going to have that why as well. Because what will happen is although you usually can't talk about the why with regards to the inmates, because you don't know what's going on in their head necessarily, you do know the why of yourself. Well, why did I feel at that time that I needed to take that baton and turn that guy's arm over? Well, he was reaching for something in his belt at the time. It turned out that he was just trying to get rid of some dope, but I needed to use force at that point because I didn't know what he might have. You can't just go in there and say that, hey, I stuck the baton in there and I turned his arm back without, justifying, without explaining what it is that you're doing. So why has its place at that moment with regards to what your particular mindset is, what your particular perception of what's going on at the time is, because it's your perception that matters with regards to using force. So, just make sure you look at that aspect, that you have all those things lined out, that you make sure you don't forget about little pieces of that probative evidence. What did that inmate say while this was going on? Did he say anything at all? Always try and get a quote off an inmate if you possibly can, because more times than not, that'll be the final nail in their coffin. It'll just be like, he may say something as innocuous as, I didn't mean to hit him that hard, or I had to do what I had to do, or something along those, excited utterances is what they're called in court. You're not there, you're not interviewing them, they're not in that kind of custody, but those excited utterances, many times that will help you out. That will make the charge stick.
Yeah, I also see when officers write threatening charges, sometimes what they'll do is they'll say the inmate threatened me, but they don't say specifically what the inmate said, or maybe the body language that could also add context to that statement. So, inmate may say, yeah, I'll see you tomorrow. Well, that could be a threat, or it could be, he'll see him tomorrow. So usually a good thing is, what was the body language? Put that in there. When the inmate said, I'll see you tomorrow, his fists were clenched, he was aggressive in his tone, or whatever it is. And also say exactly what was said. Like Russ said, a lot of people ignore the quotes, but the quotes are extremely, extremely powerful, as long as you also put the context behind the quote. Because sometimes people will also try to twist what the quote actually means. But if you add the context, which is the body language, the stuff that adds to what your perspective of that quote was, that will help the charge stick. And I also want to tell you something, since we're going back to the charge aspect, is you can't note the violation and then fail to mention the policy it violates. So sometimes people will, when they write the charge, they'll say, well, the inmate, we'll do something simple. The inmate was eating in the public area, and they just write the charge. Okay, but you have to note, as per policy or as per memo, inmates are not allowed to eat in the public area. You can't assume that someone's reading it knows that that's a violation. You have to plug it out as specific as possible. Policy number, blah, 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 or memo dated on this, blah, blah, blah. So it shows that you're enforcing the rules and not something subjective. Would you agree, Russ?
Yeah, once again, when we put what the violation is, everything that we do has to uphold that. And so we want to put ourselves in a position where we use that probative evidence to uphold that. If you cite an inmate for something with regard to, say gang language or something, and you say that, you saw the inmate and, he started talking about skinheads or whatever it was, and that he's had, prior documentation listing him as a skinhead. And he said, 88s and 14 or whatever it is. And then, stuck out his arm in a salute. You use all those things. You explain all of those things. You talk about what 88 means. You talk about what 14 means. You talk about the fact that he has, prior documentation listing him as a skinhead, and you run it down. If you just put all of that stuff in there with no context around it, it has no foundation. It has no framework to sit on, and you're going to lose them unless you have a lieutenant that already knows what the deal is and can find some way to rehabilitate your report. And then that lieutenant isn't going to like you very much because they're doing a lot of extra work for something that they shouldn't have to. You should be the one providing the nails that are going to uphold that crucifixion.
Right. Now, before we come to a close, a couple other things too, real quick. Your credibility. I want to go back to something. If you don't take the time and really spell out and really work on those charges, those reports, everything that we're talking about here, and your charges start to get thrown out because they just don't hold the weight, because again, you're not putting the effort into it. You're not being as specific as possible. The sentence structure is not flowing, whatever it is. You start to lose credibility to the DHO or to whoever's here in the case. It just becomes, oh, here's another charge from Gangi again, who, it's just your credibility lessons. I've even noticed that when you have these officers that write up every little thing, I'm not talking about rookies, I'm talking about senior staff, that some of these things could be discretionary. Again, show me you can manage the house. Don't just push everything up to a supervisor for charges and have them handle the house for you. Show me that you can manage the house, because there are some charges that are real superficial. Don't get me wrong. There could be a reason you want to bring it to that level, because maybe the inmate has been told multiple times, you try to manage the inmate, and it gets to that point where we've exhausted all options, and now you want to write up something that would really be a smaller thing, but it's just the fact that the inmate's just not compliant. I understand that. But there has to be an attempt for the things that are non-emergent, like little house things. Like I said, the one thing about eating in the public area. As a sergeant, I don't want to see that charge, to be honest with you. I don't, unless I know that you've exhausted all measures in the house to handle that charge. I'll be honest with you. That's something that you should be able to handle. And hey, get up, go eat over there. Address the inmate. Because a lot of the times, some of these officers may not even go to address the inmate. They just write the charge and they expect the supervisor to come and, oh, I'm going to go ahead and support the charge. The first thing I would say is, did you tell the inmate to get up and go? No. Well, tell him to get up and go. And if he doesn't listen, then we'll go from there. But there has to be an effort from you to control the house, discretionary, right? But with that said, if you're writing up every little thing, some of your charges are going to wind up getting dropped. Your credibility starts to lessen. So what you want to do is you kind of want to be that officer that exhausts all options when possible, and writes up things when they have to be written, because it's not something that is discretionary at that point. It's hopefully, it's something that has to be done. Then when you get that charge to the DHO and they're like, well, this came from Gangi, or this came from Russ, we know this is a serious charge. That's going to help with the charge, with how that charge is seen. Would you agree with that, Russ?
Yeah. You get to a position where your particular, what's the word I'm looking for? That your credibility is out there, and they're looking at you every single time because you're not bringing good work to it. The next time it pops up, no matter how good your work is, it's going to be looked at with suspicion, right? So what we want to do is we want to put our credibility out there in a good way. We want to make sure that what we're doing is not just the right thing, but the proper thing. You could go out there, you can write, you can write disciplinaries all day long. Is it the right thing? Probably not, because you have to put yourself in a position to try and bring inmates under discipline without necessarily putting the paperwork on it. If you're relying on that paperwork well, I'll just put it out there like this: you're weak, right? Paperwork is something that should happen, when the charge is of a sufficiently serious nature that you can't do anything else. That was my policy, right? I didn't spend my time looking for infractions and misdemeanors. I spent my time looking for, felonies and serious breaches of security. So maybe not everyone feels the same way I do about that, but that was where I started at. Because if I get bogged down in the minutia and I'm worried about, whether a guy is, out of bounds at the moment, as long as it's not impacting security, all I'm doing is I'm chasing a bunch of things that are less serious than other things that are occurring at that same moment in time in my housing unit.
I love that, Russ, because even when I was a housing officer and I developed my ways, remember, we expect certain things from the rookies because they're developing a threshold. But for me, I wanted inmates to respect the rules, not because of the disciplinary, but because of the respect they had for me. You know what I mean? To me, that is what the more honest level of compliance I was looking for. I come into a unit, the inmates knew exactly what was, what I wanted. Not because they were fear that I would write them up, and because that to me is, it's not about the fear, it's about the respect. I want the inmates to see, know that, hey, Gangi's here, this is what he expects, and then we kind of have that smooth ship. I've seen senior officers that rely on that paperwork, and in the end, they're constantly writing up, they're looking at it as a win-loss, and when the inmates beat the charge, because they will, the credibility officer starts to lessen, it becomes personal between them and that inmate, and then you wind up having this officer chasing after that inmate because they're waiting for that one golden charge, like the Willy Wonka, I'm going to keep on buying chocolate bars until I find the golden ticket. Guys, eventually that inmate's going to have this record that they're collecting. And then when you finally have a legit charge, they're going to go back and say, well, you've written this inmate up, you personally, 200 times. And every other unit he's been in hasn't gotten a write-up. It's because you're still chasing after that one write-up that he got over on. It happens. It's not personal. Don't chase after charges with other charges, because eventually, if it does go to a higher level, the inmate's going to be able to pull out all these charges and say, well, this is how many times I've been written up by this guy, and look how many times he's beaten the charge too, So that credibility, it really holds a lot of weight. Hey, Russ, you have anything you want to say in closing?
Yeah, I just want to encourage anyone out there that, has any problems writing or anything like that. Just think it through, approach those people out there at your particular institution. There's going to be guys out there that everyone's going to say, yeah, that's the guy that knows how to write. You should be picking the brains of these subject matter experts and becoming an expert yourself in every subject matter that you possibly can. And that doesn't matter whether it's gangs or whether it's report writing or whether it's handcuffing or whether it's use of force or anything else that comes along, searching, contraband, all that stuff. You should be trying to become the most complete officer that you can. But one thing that you will never be able to get away from is that in order to truly be that complete officer, you have to have that capstone of that report writing on there. Otherwise, all that other stuff that you do is going to go by the wayside. What's going to happen when you have to fight an inmate over some dope or a shank or something else that came up? Are you going to be able to document it? Are you going to be able to, make that charge stick? If you can't make that charge stick, why are you going through all the rest of the effort? So spend some time on those report writing skills, get really good at it, understand what you need, make sure you justify your actions, make sure you justify your use of force.
Right, and guys, just want to mention this too. Obviously, there's something else that's been implied that we didn't spell out today, which is fine. It's what's expected from those reviewing the case. I mean, if we're providing you with all these consistencies, don't be inconsistent. We have a lot of hearing officers that could be inconsistent in their natures, or sometimes they switch and some are more softer than others. And then it leads us wondering what we can do to keep things consistent. If you have a good, hardworking staff that's giving you the reports that you need, but then you want to sow subjective favoritism to certain inmates, you got to realize something. That's going to mess with staff, because staff's not going to see that consistency and they're not going to know what to do to write up the next one. And they start becoming disenfranchised. When a case is presented, believe it or not, guys, the benefit of the doubt should go towards custody because they are sworn law enforcement professionals, or should go to the civilian staff members who are writing the charge, unless there's a reason not to believe them, and that could be developed. But but at least at first, on that initial impression, you know, if an inmate is saying, I said this, and there's no proof to say I said something or didn't say something, believe it or not, the integrity of the person in that trusted position holds weight unless there's reason for it not to. I can't explain that. We are law enforcement professionals. We're sworn. We're in a position to trust. That means unless there's a reason not to trust me, if I said this occurred, you know, then you have to give me that benefit of the doubt, because that's something that I'm put into this trusted position for. I know a lot of times inmates will try to say, well, you know, let's say it's a good officer, let's say Russ, and inmate's trying to say, well, it's my word versus his, so it can't be proven. Russ's word is going to have a higher level than the inmate. Sorry, guys, but that's how it is. I know there may be people from the outside that may not like that, but that's the truth. So I want custody to be aware of that, or the civilian staff member to be aware of that, that you're starting out at this high level of trust. Your word carries a lot of weight. You don't want to lose that, because once you lose that, you don't get that back, ever, ever. So again, if an inmate tries to challenge Russ by saying, well, I didn't say that, but Russ's integrity is there. He's a good officer who never did anything questionable, who his word carries more weight because he's put in a higher position, that position of authority. Same thing with the civilian staff. And again, for the people on the outside looking in, I'm sorry, man, but that's just how it works, because that's our position of trust. So, and again, I did mention, unless we mess it up, the reason to be trusted. As always, guys, the show is tiered. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. Stay safe.